Welcome to Detective Duo, where classic mysteries come alive, from quiet villages to secret meetings with Tommy and Tuppence themselves. Do remember to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Domestic peace, Tuppence decided, was a most suspicious condition. It always arrived hand in hand with boredom. She sat curled in the corner of the sofa, an open magazine drooping in her lap, while the clock on the mantel ticked with maddening civility. The fire gave an occasional pop, as though applauding its own restraint. Tommy, behind the Times, cleared his throat in that meaningful way husbands develop when they wish the universe to produce excitement on command. "You know," he said, lowering the paper, "there was a time when one of us couldn't sit quietly by the fire without someone firing a revolver outside." Tuppence smiled without looking up. "And now the most dangerous sound in our street is the milkman's whistle." She reached for her cup. Perhaps adventure has grown sensible and settled down next door. Their small sitting room in the modest Chelsea house bore traces of their shared temperament: maps framed as pictures, a pair of binoculars on the sideboard, and the faint, lingering smell of travel trunks that had seen too many trains. The Beresfords were, by outward appearance, a perfectly respectable couple in early middle age. By inward restlessness, they were anything but. A rap came at the window. Not a polite knock, but a sudden flat sound. Flesh against glass. Tuppence started, sloshing tea onto her skirt. "Good heavens," she murmured. Tommy was already at the door. Outside, beneath the pale street lamp, stood a man bareheaded, rain, or perhaps sweat, running down his temple. His coat was unbuttoned, his tie awry, and his expression carried the startled politeness of one who has mislaid not only his hat, but his identity. "I beg pardon," he said, voice clipped yet uncertain. "I think I've lost my way." Tommy's soldier instincts overrode caution. "Come in, man, before you freeze. Tuppence, fetch a towel." They guided him to the armchair nearest the fire. Up close he appeared about 40, well-bred, with the air of someone accustomed to good hotels and official corridors. A thin line of blood marked his hairline. Tuppence pressed a folded napkin to the wound. "You've had a nasty knock. Were you in an accident?" He blinked slowly. "Train? Yes, I think there was a train. Istanbul. No, London. I arrived this morning." His eyes clouded. "I was to meet someone at Paddington." Tommy crouched beside him. "What's your name?" The man frowned as if the question were indecent. "I can't remember. There was a letter." His fingers fumbled inside his coat and produced a crumpled envelope, the Foreign Office seal dull against damp paper, and a folded ticket, Istanbul, London, 2nd class. Before Tommy could ask more, the stranger's head sagged. In a low, urgent whisper he breathed, "The Pact of Shadows. They mustn't find the others." Then his body went limp. Tuppence's voice sharpened. "Tommy, he's fainted!" They exchanged a look that contained both concern and the unmistakable gleam of curiosity. She fetched smelling salts. Tommy reached for the telephone. But before either could act, the front bell jangled. 3 brisk peals. It was the district doctor, summoned earlier by a neighbour who had seen the commotion. Dr. Hobday, short, red-faced and brisk, entered with his bag already open. "Head injury, is it?" "Possibly," said Tommy. "He collapsed a moment ago." They turned toward the chair. It was empty. For a moment none of them spoke. The front door stood half open, swaying slightly on its hinges. Hobday swore under his breath and dashed out into the street. Tommy followed. But the pavement was deserted except for the glistening trail of a wet footprint leading toward the corner, and ending abruptly in a puddle. When Tommy returned, rain on his coat, he found Tuppence kneeling by the hearth examining the envelope. "He's gone," she said unnecessarily, "but he left us a puzzle." The wax seal had been torn cleanly in half. Within lay only a blank sheet, faintly scented with tobacco and something metallic, like old coins. "Foreign Office correspondence doesn't travel empty," Tommy muttered, "unless the contents were removed in a hurry." "Or never existed," Tuppence suggested. "Perhaps the letter itself was the message." Hobday, impatient at their tone, closed his bag. "If the fellow's concussed, he'll turn up at St. Stephen's Hospital soon enough. Good night to you both, and lock your door next time you play Samaritan." When he'd gone, Tommy bolted the door obediently, but his eyes were bright. "The Pact of Shadows," he repeated. Sounds like a club for unrepentant diplomats. Tuppence, still studying the paper, smiled faintly. Or an adventure, finally. Later, when the fire had burned low, Tommy fetched his magnifying glass, a veteran of earlier escapades, and examined the seal. "Funny thing," he murmured. "There's a groove inside the wax, almost as if a second impression was pressed before it set." He scraped gently with a penknife. Beneath the crimson wax appeared a tiny indented mark, a circle divided by a cross, and at its centre the faintest outline of a crescent. Tuppence leaned over his shoulder. A cipher? Or an emblem? Possibly both. He sat back, frowning. "You know, Tuppence, when men start muttering about pacts and vanish without paying the tea bill, it generally ends with us being shot at." She gave a delighted sigh. "After 2 months of parish meetings and respectable dinners, I'd call that progress." He laughed. "You're incorrigible." "I'm practical," she corrected. "Tomorrow we'll take this to someone who recognizes Foreign Office seals and find out what sort of letter travels empty." Tommy placed the envelope carefully in the drawer of the writing desk. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," she said, extinguishing the lamp, "we lock the door and hope our nameless friend doesn't decide to reclaim his property at 3 a.m. But the night refused to stay quiet. Sometime after 2, a faint sound woke Tommy, a scrape against the front gate. He rose silently, the floorboard creaking in protest. Through the curtain he saw only mist and lamplight, yet the sense of being observed prickled his skin. A figure stood briefly at the corner, tall, hat-brim low, a cigarette's ember glowing red, then vanishing. By dawn the street looked harmless again. Tuppence appeared in her dressing gown with coffee and a triumphant air. "I've been thinking," she announced. "If our stranger came from Istanbul, he must have entered through Dover or Southampton. There'll be a passenger list." Tommy accepted the cup. "You propose we spend our respectable morning pestering the harbour office?" "Exactly. One must start somewhere." He regarded her fondly. "You do realise we've promised ourselves no more amateur espionage?" "Promises," Tuppence said airily, "are for people with dull lives." By mid-morning, they had little to show for their efforts except the knowledge that no recent arrivals from Istanbul matched the stranger's description. Returning home, Tommy unlocked the desk drawer, then stopped. The envelope lay where he'd left it, but the wax seal was gone. In its place, the faint scent of Turkish tobacco drifted upward. Tuppence's eyes met his. "So, our guest did return." Tommy's reply was quiet but determined. "And he'll come again, until he gets what he wants. Let's be ready next time." Outside, a newspaper boy called headlines about rising tensions abroad, the words Foreign Office echoing down the quiet street like an omen. Tuppence folded her arms, gaze on the empty hearth. "Tommy," she said softly, "I believe domestic peace has officially ended." He smiled, that old, reckless glint rekindled. "Then, my dear, welcome home to adventure." "Foreign Office men," Tuppence said over breakfast, "always look as though they've just swallowed a secret and found it indigestible." Tommy buttered his toast with unnecessary precision. "That's precisely why I'm going to see one." "You mean Beecham?" He nodded. "Sir Andrew Beecham. We served in the same intelligence outfit in 18. He's respectable now, which means he'll hate being reminded of it." Tuppence smiled. "Do give him my regards, darling. I'll be out as well." The train ticket had a name printed faintly on the back. "Elder and Grant Booksellers, Holborn. I'm going to see whether our mystery man preferred spy thrillers or Turkish poetry." Tommy leaned back, studying her. "You're rather enjoying yourself, aren't you?" "I am. And so would you, if you'd stop pretending you're only doing this out of civic duty." He laughed, kissed her cheek, and left whistling, the envelope with the broken seal in his inside pocket. Sir Andrew Beecham's office at the Foreign Office was as correct as a government form, all mahogany gleam, faintly musty leather, and the quiet tension of classified air. The man himself rose from behind his desk, round-faced and impeccably tailored, with a smile that stopped half an inch short of sincerity. "Beresford? Good heavens, it's been years. Still dabbling in detection?" "Strictly amateur these days," Tommy replied, "though something rather odd has turned up. I'd appreciate your discretion." He laid the damaged envelope on the desk. Beecham regarded it for no longer than a heartbeat, then pushed it back with 2 fingers, as though it might stain. Where did you find this?" Tommy watched him closely. In the possession of a man who couldn't remember his name. He muttered about something called the Pact of Shadows. Ring any bells? Beecham's expression cooled. "I'd advise you, my dear fellow, to forget you ever heard that phrase." "Which naturally makes me curious," said Tommy mildly. Beecham sighed. There were a number of provisional treaties drafted near the end of the war. The Istanbul Pact was one such. It was never ratified, never acknowledged, merely a myth among the lower clerks. It involved the protection of certain identities, the exchange of others, espionage under polite terminology. You understand? "I understand you're nervous," Tommy said. "Why?" Beecham rose and moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Because some ghosts are best left asleep, and because the people who dealt in those identities are not all dead." He turned, face pale. "Drop it, Beresford. There's nothing here worth your curiosity, and quite a few things worth your life." Tommy studied him a moment longer, then smiled pleasantly. "You're quite right. I'll do that." But, as he walked out, he knew Beecham's hands had trembled slightly when he spoke, and that he had lied. Holborn at midday smelled of ink, rain on pavement, and the sharp tang of car exhaust. Elder and Grant booksellers hid between a tobacconist and a cafe, its window displaying rows of atlases, Turkish phrase books, and dusty spy novels that looked insultingly literal. A bell tinkled as Tuppence entered. The air smelled of leather bindings and quiet secrecy. Behind the counter stood a silver-haired woman in a lavender blouse, sorting receipts with the air of someone too refined for commerce. "Good morning," Tuppence said brightly. "I wonder if you could help me. I came across one of your shop's labels on a train ticket from Istanbul. I was curious who might have bought it." The woman's smile was charming but faint. "We sell a great many books, madam. I'm afraid individual sales aren't recorded." "Of course. It's only that there was something rather unusual about it." Tuppence unfolded her notebook, where she had carefully sketched the cipher mark, the circle, the cross, and the faint crescent Tommy had discovered. "Does this mean anything to you?" For the briefest instant, less than a blink, the woman's hand faltered. A slip of paper drifted to the floor. Then she bent smoothly to pick it up. "No, I can't say that it does," she said with perfect calm. "A decorative seal, perhaps. You might try a heraldic library." "Perhaps I shall," said Tuppence, matching her tone. "Thank you." She turned to leave, catching the faint scent of old perfume, violet and something sharper beneath it, like metal. Outside, the air felt suddenly thinner. Across the street, a man leaned casually against a lamppost, newspaper folded but unread. His gaze followed her reflection in the window glass. Tall, in a dark overcoat, gloved hands. When she glanced again, he appeared absorbed in his paper, but as she crossed the road, she heard the low rumble of a car engine. A black Wolseley idled at the corner. The man entered it without hurry, the car sliding into traffic like an eel disappearing into reeds. That evening, Tommy returned home looking thoughtful. Beecham nearly turned apoplectic when I mentioned the Istanbul Pact. He called it myth, but his complexion suggested indigestion of the moral variety. Tuppence, seated by the fire with a glass of sherry, looked up. My bookshop lady wasn't any better. She lied, prettily but definitively, and I was followed by a man with the manners of a lamppost and the persistence of influenza. Tommy's brow lifted. Description? Tall, dark, and inconspicuously conspicuous. Drove a black Wolseley. He frowned. I saw one parked outside the Foreign Office this afternoon. They sat in silence for a moment, the clock marking the seconds with officious precision. Tuppence broke it first. You realize what this means? Yes, we're being watched. And followed. And possibly out of our depth. She smiled, eyes alight. How thrilling, Tommy chuckled. You're impossible. That's why you married me. Later that night, as the fire died to embers, Tommy reread his notes. Faraz, he muttered. That must be the man's name, the one who collapsed. The Foreign Office had a Faraz in intelligence posted in Istanbul in 19. Beecham would have known him. Tuppence closed her eyes, thinking aloud. Faraz travels to London with documents no one admits exist. Someone tries to stop him. He reaches our street, speaks of a pact, disappears. The woman at the bookshop recognizes the symbol. The man in the Wolseley watches me. It's all frightfully tidy. Too tidy, Tommy said, and we still don't know what the pact actually was. He rose, stretched, and went to lock the door. Through the frosted glass he caught a flicker of movement, a shadow shifting away into the night. Tommy? Nothing, he said softly, just the postman with bad timing. Yet when they checked the letter slot, no post had been delivered. Only a small square of paper lay on the mat, plain, except for one line of type, "Leave the past in Istanbul." Tuppence stared at the note, her expression unreadable. Then she said briskly, "I think we've just received our invitation." Tommy managed a smile. "You call that an invitation?" "Certainly. When someone tells me not to do something, I find it irresistible." He pocketed the note carefully. "Tomorrow we start at the address tied to that cipher. Bloomsbury, wasn't it?" "Yes. And Tommy, yes? Be careful whom you trust." He nodded. "That includes Beecham." They looked at each other in the quiet glow of the lamp, partners, adventurers, perhaps slightly mad, and outside, somewhere in the night, a Wolseley engine purred briefly before fading into the London dark. The Beresfords' dining table had been cleared of all but the essentials, one envelope, one candle, and two expressions of conspiratorial delight. Tuppence leaned forward, the lamplight catching in her fair hair. "You realize, Tommy, this is exactly how trouble starts. A quiet evening, a mysterious scrap of stationery, and me suggesting something dangerous." Tommy adjusted his spectacles. "Yes, and I'm still waiting for the dangerous part. Thus far, it's been glorified philately." "Patience," she said, holding the envelope carefully over the lamp's warm glow. "You can't rush revelation." As the paper warmed, faint lines began to appear, strokes of blue ink as though surfacing from another time. Letters, numbers, and what looked like coordinates. BM 52 Russell Score. Tommy let out a low whistle. Bloomsbury. And BM. "Possibly the initials of our amnesiac friend," said Tuppence, eyes bright. "Or a rendezvous point. Either way, it's an address, and I don't believe in coincidences." "Nor do I," said Tommy. "But I have an excellent belief in caution." She smiled. "You can take the revolver, dear." 52. Russell Square was the sort of house that had once been fashionable and had since resigned itself to decline with dignity. Lace curtains drooped in the windows, and a faint smell of cabbage hung in the air, mingled with floor polish and loneliness. A stout landlady answered the door, a woman with arms like rolling pins and an expression designed to discourage nonsense. "Yes?" Tommy produced a polite smile. "We're looking for a Mr. Ferrars. We believe he may have lodged here recently." Her face softened a fraction. "Oh, poor gentleman. Foreign sort. Limped a little. Always polite. Paid in advance, too, which you don't often see these days. Vanished 2 nights ago, just up and gone." "Did he leave anything behind?" asked Tuppence. "Only his room key and a dreadful smell of burnt paper. I haven't touched a thing since. You can look if you're family." "Practically cousins," said Tuppence cheerfully, and followed her up the stairs before Tommy could object. The room was small, neat, and impersonal. A table, a trunk, a narrow bed with a coverlet folded precisely. Yet it held the ghost of recent tension. A chair overturned, a window latch broken. On the writing desk, the remains of something burned lay in an ashtray, the edges of a photograph, half consumed. Tuppence bent close. Someone tried to destroy this, but not carefully enough. She teased it out with tweezers, and together they examined what remained. 4 figures stood in a group, dressed in early 20th century fashion. 2 men, 2 women. The upper corner was intact enough to show a partial smile and the line of a jaw that looked disconcertingly familiar. Tommy frowned. "Good heavens, Tuppence, that could almost be you." She squinted. "If I'd been 20 years younger, perhaps. But look at the background. That isn't England. That looks like a key, and those pillars could be Ottoman." "Istanbul again," said Tommy. "Of course. And Mr. Ferrars was on that train from Istanbul to London. It's all part of the same thread." Tuppence crossed to the window, glancing down at the street. "You know what bothers me most?" "What's that?" "Someone burned this photograph here, in a boarding house, and then left. People don't destroy evidence unless they're frightened." Tommy examined the desk. The drawers had been rifled, though closed again with deceptive neatness. A faint scent lingered, rich, dry, and unmistakably foreign. "Turkish tobacco," he murmured. Tuppence turned sharply. "Faraz smoked?" "He did," Tommy said. "But this brand, Sultan's Gold, is expensive and rare, and our landlady looks like she'd faint if she saw anyone smoking indoors. Someone else was here after he left." They returned to the street, walking briskly past the railings of the square where autumn leaves clung stubbornly to branches. Tuppence said, "You know, Tommy, this feels like one of those cases you used to read aloud to me when we were newly married. Coded letters, missing diplomats, fainting ladies in bookshops." Tommy grinned. "Except the fainting lady this time has better shoes." She ignored that. "Let's imagine Faraz for a moment. Post-war agent, worked in Istanbul. Knows too much, perhaps about this so-called pact. Comes to London with evidence, punter, or guilt. He's followed, attacked, and ends up on our doorstep. Logical so far?" "Logical enough to make me nervous," Tommy said, "but we've still no proof he's the same man who muttered about shadows." Tuppence's eyes sparkled. "Then we'll find proof." Before leaving, they revisited the landlady for one last question. She was polishing the banister and seemed pleased to have an audience. "Did anyone call for Mr. Faraz before he disappeared?" Tuppence asked casually. The woman frowned. "A gentleman, foreign-looking, very polite. Said he was a colleague from the embassy. I didn't like him. Too smooth, if you take my meaning. Wore gloves. Left no name." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "Did you notice his car?" "Big black motor. I don't know makes, but it purred like a cat." Tommy's voice was grim. "A Wolseley?" The landlady brightened. "That's it. I remember because I thought it was the same sort the police use." "Thank you," said Tuppence softly. "You've been most helpful." They walked home through dusk, lamps flickering to life in the shop fronts. A light drizzle began, more scent than rain, and the city glowed under its thin silver film. Tommy said, "We're dealing with people who don't like witnesses. Beecham warned us for a reason." "Beecham," said Tuppence, "is the very reason I don't believe warnings. That man's pulse jumped like a guilty conscience." At the corner, a newspaper boy shouted headlines. "Foreign Office denies existence of secret treaty." Tommy paused. "You hear that?" "I do, and I wonder who asked them." They reached their front step, and as Tommy fitted the key into the lock, he paused. The air smelled faintly, unmistakably, of the same Turkish tobacco. He turned slowly. Across the street, the same black Wolseley was parked beneath the lamplight, its engines silent, windows dark. Tuppence whispered, "He's watching us." Tommy nodded. "Let him. It proves we're right." She exhaled, half thrill, half fear. "Oh, Tommy, we're in it again." He smiled faintly. "Yes, old thing. I rather think we are." It was Tuppence's idea to go by foot. "Adventurers don't arrive in taxis," she said briskly, tightening her scarf as they turned off the King's Road into a quieter Chelsea street lined with old plane trees and discreet mysteries. "Besides, it gives one a chance to look unimportant." Tommy muttered something about the virtues of looking unimportant from a distance, but followed her lead. The trail from Russell Square and Ferrar's notes and the landlady's hint of a Chelsea contact had led them here, to an address that looked neither alive nor quite dead. Number 9 Beaufort Crescent stood at a slight angle to the street, as if trying to avoid conversation with its neighbours. Its windows were shuttered, but behind the grime, patterns of blue and green ceramic tiles shimmered faintly, a Moorish mosaic framing the doorway like an exotic echo from Istanbul itself. Tuppence drew in a small breath. The house of painted tiles. I suppose our Mr. Faraz had a flair for romance. "Or for poor real estate decisions," Tommy replied. "It looks abandoned." "Exactly why it interests me." The lock gave way under surprisingly little persuasion. Inside, the air was thick with stillness, yet there was a lived-in undercurrent, the scent of dust mingled with tea leaves, the faint hum of a ticking clock somewhere deeper in the house. They stepped into a long drawing room. Light filtered through cracked shutters, pooling on a table where a teapot still steamed faintly beside 2 cups. Tuppence tilted her head. "Tea still warm," she murmured. "Either ghosts have good timing, or someone's just left." Tommy approached the mantelpiece, where a map was pinned across the wall. The Bosphorus curved elegantly in faded blue ink, dotted with markings, some in English, others in Ottoman script. A length of red thread linked 3 points: Galata Tower, Saray Burnu, and Leander's Tower. He frowned. These aren't tourist destinations, they're vantage points. Observation posts? Or meeting sites, Tommy said. Someone's been tracking something, or someone, across Istanbul. Tuppence moved to a bureau by the window. Her hand brushed a fine layer of dust, broken by the neat shape of a rectangle. Something had been resting there recently. A case, she guessed, probably carried off in a hurry. Tommy joined her. Faraz's attaché? Likely, which means this was his safe house. They worked quietly, eyes trained for patterns. It was Tuppence who discovered the hidden compartment, a narrow panel beneath the bureau drawer, fitted so perfectly it gave no hint of its existence until she pressed the right corner. Inside lay a small leather-bound case containing a passport. She flipped it open. British. Name, Martin Fell. Tommy's brow furrowed. A forgery. How can you tell? For one thing, the photo's been replaced. For another, the official stamp overlaps it badly. Sloppy work. Not Faraz's style, then. No, but perhaps someone else's. They both started as the floor creaked overhead. The footsteps were unhurried, measured, deliberate, approaching the landing. Tommy gestured sharply. They slipped behind a pair of heavy curtains framing the window. Through the fabric's gap, they watched the door ease open. 2 men entered, their silhouettes cutting against the pale hallway light. One was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an overcoat and hat pulled low. The other, shorter and wirier, carried the nervous energy of a man used to giving orders in whispers. The tall man spoke first, his accent faintly foreign, smooth and controlled. Faraz failed. You were warned that he couldn't be trusted. The smaller man replied sharply. He had information. About the shipment. He was meant to deliver it here. And now? Gone. Vanished in London. The tall man's voice hardened. Then we find it ourselves. Selim Nadir won't wait much longer. Tuppence's heart gave a tiny leap. Selim Nadir, the name had surfaced at last. The men moved closer to the table. One poured the remaining tea and sniffed it. Still warm. Someone's been here. Tommy's hand tightened around Tuppence's wrist. She hardly dared breathe. The tall man's gaze swept the room. Check upstairs. The smaller one hesitated. And if they return? Then we finish what Faraz couldn't. The word finish hung like smoke. As footsteps receded toward the staircase, Tuppence mouthed silently, Now. Tommy nodded. They slipped from the curtain's shadow, crossed to the opposite door, and eased it open. The hinges betrayed them with a faint squeak. A pause, then a voice from the stairs. Wait, did you hear that? They ran, not wildly, but with the swift, quiet desperation of people who know that hesitation kills. The back hallway was narrow, lined with cracked tiles and the faint smell of damp. At the end, a small kitchen opened onto a garden gone to ruin. Tuppence pushed at the back door. It resisted, then gave way with a groan. Through here, she hissed. Behind them came the sound of a door flung open, footsteps pounding. They darted into the overgrown garden, weeds clawing at their ankles. Tommy reached for the latch of a side gate, but it was rusted fast. He vaulted it instead, then turned to help her. That was when her heel broke. The sharp crack of leather echoed absurdly loud. Tuppence stared at her betrayed shoe, half dangling. I knew I should have worn the sensible pair. Adventure, Tommy said between gritted teeth, requires practical footwear. She bit back a laugh and kicked the shoe off altogether, hopping over the gate with one bare foot and one sensible heel. They landed in the alley behind, just as a man's voice shouted from within. They've gone out the back. Tommy grabbed her hand. Left, toward the river. They ran, breath misting in the evening air until the sound of pursuit faded into the hum of distant traffic. They stopped beneath a railway arch, panting and exhilarated. Tuppence leaned against the wall, laughing softly despite herself. Well, that was invigorating. Tommy shot her a look half amusement, half reproach. You're impossible. Thank you, darling. Now, did you happen to notice the map? I took a photograph. He blinked. When? While you were examining the passport. She tapped her handbag proudly. A girl must multitask. Good heavens, woman, you're going to get us both killed. Probably, she said cheerfully, but not tonight. Tommy sobered. Selim Nadir, the tall one, mentioned him. Turkish diplomat stationed in London. That's our next lead. And the shipment, Tuppence added, whatever that means. It's linked to Ferrars and to this so-called pact. They walked home slowly, the city alive around them, car horns, laughter spilling from a pub, the faint scent of roasted chestnuts mixing with the night air. At their door, Tommy hesitated, looking back toward the darker streets behind them. Someone's still following us, he said quietly. I know, Tuppence answered, unlocking the door, and I don't intend to make it easy for them. She turned, her expression half mischief, half resolve. Next stop, the Foreign Office reception. If Selim Nadir is hosting diplomats, we'll find our invitation. Tommy sighed. And what will you wear? Something that allows for running. Don't be ridiculous, she said. A lady doesn't run at receptions, she glides. There are evenings that feel ordinary from the outside, yet carry the unmistakable hum of destiny underneath, and Tuppence Beresford, buttoning her sapphire dress before the mirror, suspected this would be one of them. Do stop preening, said Tommy from the doorway, knotting his tie with soldierly impatience. You're meant to be posing as an art critic, not launching a campaign to bankrupt the Turkish embassy in perfume. Presentation, my dear boy, is half the battle, she replied airily. If we're to meet the elusive Selim Nadir, I intend to ensure he remembers me more vividly than any forged passport. Tommy sighed. You'll forgive me if I focus on not getting arrested. The reception at the British Council was a theatre of diplomacy, chandeliers gleaming like captured constellations, the air tinged with champagne and polite tension. A quartet played unobtrusive string music in the corner, and waiters moved with the precision of spies trained in silver trays. Tommy and Tuppence moved through the crowd with the unhurried grace of people who belonged anywhere. He wore the mild expression of a man vaguely interested in foreign policy. She carried herself like a novelist, half distracted by her own brilliance. Selim Nadir, Tommy murmured, nodding subtly toward the far end of the room. The Turkish diplomat stood near a display of Ottoman ceramics, tall, silver-templed, his evening coat immaculate. His movements were elegant yet calculating, every gesture measured. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. That, my love, is a man who knows exactly how many lies he's told and keeps them alphabetized. Perfect match for you, then. Don't be childish. She straightened her shawl. Let me handle this. Tuppence approached him as though drawn by scholarly curiosity rather than design. Mr. Nadir, isn't it? I couldn't help admiring your exhibition notes on Turkish tilework. Quite enthralling. His dark eyes flickered over her face, swift, assessing, not unkind. You flatter me, Mrs. Beresford, she said easily. Tuppence Beresford. I write occasionally on art and the persistence of cultural motifs, how they survive borders and time. Ah, his smile deepened. Then you must understand the danger of preserving what is meant to disappear. That depends, said Tuppence lightly, on whether the thing in question is beauty or truth. He studied her for a long moment. You are an interesting woman, Mrs. Beresford. I try to be, though at my age one must rely on conversation rather than complexion. He chuckled softly, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. Tell me, Mrs. Beresford, have you ever been to Istanbul? Once, she said, feigning thought. Years ago. I recall it as a city that remembers too much. Indeed, he murmured. Some memories refuse burial, especially when there are lost documents. The word hung between them like the final note of a melody. Tuppence met his gaze evenly. Lost things have a way of returning, if one looks hard enough. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture both courteous and warning. But one must be certain one wishes them found. Before she could answer, a movement behind him drew his attention. A woman had entered the circle of light, striking, red-haired, with the self-possession of someone used to control. She spoke to Nadir rapidly in French, her tone sharp enough to slice glass. Tuppence, ever observant, caught two phrases. The meeting failed, and your Englishman was careless. Tommy, standing nearby with his champagne, turned slightly to listen. The woman's voice rose, quiet but furious. You promised discretion. Now Faraz is gone, and the others grow restless. They won't tolerate another mistake. Nadir's tone remained smooth. Control yourself. This is not the place. You think I care for your parties? They're already watching us. Her hand trembled as she adjusted her gloves, fine suede, embroidered with a small crest in gold thread, a lion flanked by 2 stars. Then, as she turned abruptly, the glove slipped from her fingers and fell to the parquet floor. Tuppence's eyes tracked it instantly, but before she could move, the woman was gone, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. Tommy retrieved the glove discreetly, concealing it in his pocket. Nadir stood alone now, the diplomat's composure restored, his smile once more the perfect mask. Tuppence approached him again, calm and conversational. You look as though you've just remembered something unpleasant. Only that politics, he said dryly, is full of ghosts. Some refuse to rest. I should think so, she said, with just enough edge to make him glance at her sharply. Then she smiled, bright, careless, and drifted back to Tommy. They left the reception an hour later, descending the marble steps into the soft hum of evening traffic. Did you see her? Tommy said. The woman from the photograph, older now, but unmistakable. Tuppence nodded. And furious. Whatever game they're playing, Faraz was their pawn, and he didn't move as planned. She held out her hand. The glove? Tommy passed it over. Under the street lamp the crest gleamed faintly, the lion and stars embroidered with military precision. Recognize it? He asked. No, but I'd wager Beecham might. Tommy grimaced. Beecham's likely part of the reason we're in this mess. Then perhaps he'll talk to save his conscience, or his career. She tucked the glove into her handbag. In the meantime, we have confirmation. Nadir knows about the missing papers, and he's not the only one. Tommy hailed a cab. Let's get home before our mysterious friends decide to continue the discussion outdoors. The cab had barely turned into the embankment when the first sign of trouble appeared, headlights glinting behind them, steady and too close. Tuppence glanced back. Tommy, I think we've acquired company. He turned, frowning. Black Wolseley again. Consistency is so reassuring, she said wryly. The car behind them accelerated. Their driver swore under his breath. They're tailing us, sir. Lose them, Tommy ordered. The cab swerved down a side street, tyres hissing against the wet pavement. The Wolseley followed, silent and relentless. Tuppence's heart thudded. Fear and exhilaration mingled into one. They shot past shuttered shops, through a narrow lane, and out onto the riverside road where the lamps reflected in broken gold on the Thames. Faster! Tommy shouted. The driver obliged, but the Wolseley closed in. At the next corner it pulled alongside, forcing them toward the embankment wall. Tuppence gasped as the car's flanks scraped theirs with a shriek of metal. Tommy! He yanked her down just as the Wolseley veered sharply, cutting them off. For a heartbeat it looked as though they'd crash, but the cabbie braked hard. The car skidded, stopped inches from the stone parapet. The Wolseley paused. Its tinted window rolled down just enough for a gloved hand to emerge, 2 fingers raised in a mock salute, before it sped off into the night. Silence rushed in behind the departing engine. The driver swore again, shakily. Tommy climbed out, checking Tuppence. You all right? Ruffled, not ruined, she said, straightening her shawl, though I may need another drink. He managed a tight smile. Next time we take the underground. She exhaled, eyes following the fading taillights. They wanted to frighten us, or warn us off. Which, as you know, never works. Tommy looked toward the river, dark water moving under the lights, implacable and secretive. This isn't just about documents anymore. It's about survival. Tuppence's voice softened. And yet, there's something terribly human about it. All these men playing at shadows because they're afraid of being forgotten. He glanced at her. You're becoming philosophical. It's either that or hysterical, she said dryly. And I've misplaced my smelling salts. They re-entered the cab. As it pulled away, Tuppence opened her handbag and ran a finger over the gold-stitched crest on the glove. Whatever this stands for, she murmured, someone's willing to kill for it. Tommy looked at her reflection in the window, the faint smile that always appeared when danger drew close. And someone, he said, will have to outthink them. The city lights slid past, pale, secretive and silent, as the Beresfords disappeared into the London night, their next move already forming in the quiet space between their thoughts. There was something faintly theatrical about the way the glove lay on their breakfast table, a single relic of intrigue amid toast crumbs and marmalade. Tuppence, in her dressing gown, examined it as though it might at any moment confess. The embroidery's too fine for a mere accessory, she mused. This was made for someone who wanted to be recognized, discreetly. Tommy poured the coffee. It's the sort of recognition that gets people shot. That crest, the lion and 2 stars, must mean something. He fetched his magnifying glass. You see here? The thread's gold wire, military grade, and these tiny initials worked into the border. SV. Section 5, Tuppence said instantly. Tommy looked up. You know that name? Only whispers. It was an intelligence branch during the war, the one no one admitted existed. Rumour said they specialised in deniable operations abroad. He set the glass down slowly. If that's true, our little puzzle just became a matter of state. Which, she said, sipping her coffee, is precisely my favourite kind. By late morning, the pair had transformed the dining table into a crime lab of sorts. The glove lay dissected under the lamplight, its lining gently teased away with a knitting needle. Tuppence frowned. There's something stitched in the seam, a strip of parchment perhaps. She coaxed it free, a narrow slip of silk, faded and fragile, bearing 3 words in block capitals. Wardrobe, Vesper, Soho. Tommy whistled softly. You can't say our clues lack flair. Soho, Tuppence murmured, eyes glinting. The district where secrets go when they can't afford Mayfair rent. He folded the note into his wallet. Wardrobe and Vesper. Sounds like either a biblical code or a tailor's appointment. Tuppence grinned. Then let's dress appropriately. The shop on Dean Street presented itself as nothing more suspicious than an aging tailor's establishment, the kind that clothed both gentlemen and ghosts of better days. Bolts of fabric lined the walls. The air smelled of chalk, wool, and faintly of pipe smoke. An elderly man emerged from the back room, needle still in hand. Good morning, sir. Madam. Suiting, perhaps? Alterations? Tommy smiled pleasantly. We were recommended by a mutual friend. He said you might know something about the Vesper wardrobe. The man froze, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. His eyes darted to the door, then to the curtained fitting room. Come this way, he said quietly. He led them through to a narrow passage smelling of camphor. A wardrobe stood against the far wall, tall and unremarkable, until he pressed his palm against the left panel. With a muted click, the back swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into shadow. Tuppence breathed, My word, straight out of a penny thriller. The tailor's voice was grave. I was told to expect someone eventually, but not civilians. Tommy's tone was mild. We have a personal interest in Section 5. Then tread carefully, the man warned. That section had long arms and longer memories. The steps led down to a basement chamber lined with filing cabinets and dust-coated equipment. On the desk sat a cipher wheel, a Morse transmitter, and the unmistakable smell of machine oil and history. Tuppence ran her fingers over the objects reverently. It feels like we've stumbled into a museum that forgot to close. Tommy moved to the desk. Look at this, a photograph. He held it under the lamp. 4 figures stared out in sepia clarity, a group on a sunlit terrace, their expressions too formal for friendship. He pointed. There's Faraz, unmistakable, and Nadir beside him. Tuppence leaned closer. The red-haired woman again, younger, but still formidable, and the 4th, Tommy's voice faltered, Andrew Beecham. The realization landed like a chill draft through the room. Beecham was part of this mission, she said softly. Apparently. Istanbul, 1919, the end of the occupation years. Section 5 was operating then. Tuppence folded her arms. Which means when Beecham told you the pact was only a myth, he was lying through his perfectly brushed teeth. Tommy's jaw tightened. He's not just a bureaucrat covering a scandal. He's a survivor covering a crime. While Tuppence photographed the room with her compact camera, Tommy leafed through the files on the desk, dossiers stamped top secret, each neatly labelled but oddly pristine. He frowned. These papers are too new. The typewriter ink hasn't faded, and the formatting, look, it's modern. Someone planted these. Tuppence looked up sharply. To test whether we'd find them. Exactly. We were meant to walk into this, take the bait, and lead them to our interest in the pact. She replaced the photograph carefully. Then they already know we're looking. Tommy nodded grimly. And they'll expect us to run. Which, she said briskly, we absolutely shan't. She scanned the room once more. Still, I'd rather not be found standing here when they return for the next act. Tommy extinguished the lamp, returning the room to half-darkness. We'll take only what can't be traced, the photograph and the glove's crest. They moved quickly back through the wardrobe passage. As they reached the shop, they found the tailor gone, the front bell tinkling faintly though the door stood open to the street. Tuppence murmured, "He's warned them." Or run for his life. Either way, they stepped out into Soho's restless afternoon, blending into the chatter and the hum of passing traffic. The cab rattled toward Mayfair. Tuppence leaned back, the photograph in her lap, her mind racing. Do you realize what this means? Beecham, Faraz, Nadir, and that woman, all part of one mission. The Istanbul Pact wasn't political, it was personal. They shared something dangerous enough to fake an entire network to protect. Tommy nodded. And now someone's resurrecting it. The faked files, the staged clues, are all meant to flush out whoever still knows the truth. Tuppence gazed out at the passing shop fronts. Perhaps we were never chasing them. Perhaps they were chasing us. He gave a short laugh. You do have a talent for optimism. I call it realism. Optimism would mean assuming we'll live long enough for dinner. Back at the flat, dusk settled in the windows like quiet smoke. Tommy pinned the new photograph beside the charred fragment on their notice board. The difference was startling. What had been suggestion now stood in certainty. Tuppence lit a cigarette, watching him. You know what this does to Beecham's story? Yes, he said quietly. It destroys it. She blew out a thin curl of smoke. He warned you off the pact because he wasn't afraid of it being discovered. He was afraid of being recognized. Tommy's gaze hardened. And that means the next step isn't Istanbul or Nadir. It's Beecham himself. Tuppence nodded. Confrontation over cocktails. Very British. Very dangerous, he corrected. She smiled faintly. So is marriage. We're still doing rather well at both. He laughed despite himself, the sound cutting through the tension. But as the clock struck 6, the laughter faded, replaced by a shared, uneasy silence. From somewhere beyond the window came the faint sound of a car idling. Too long, too patient. Tommy crossed to the curtain, peered through the gap. Black Wolseley, he murmured. Tuppence stubbed out her cigarette. Then it's official. We've been promoted from amateurs to targets. He drew the curtain closed. Let's hope we prove worth the effort. The clock ticked on, unhurried and merciless, as outside the car finally pulled away, leaving behind only the echo of its engine and the knowledge that, for the Beresfords, the shadows were now closing in from both sides. It began with a knock that didn't sound like a visitor's, too deliberate, too certain. Tuppence looked up from the morning paper, her teacup poised mid-air. That, my dear, is the knock of authority or guilt. I'm still deciding which. Tommy opened the door. Sir Andrew Beecham stood there, immaculate in his grey overcoat, bowler hat tucked under one arm. He looked every inch the statesman, except for the strain about his eyes. "Beresford," he said briskly, stepping inside without invitation. "Mrs. Beresford." He gave Tuppence a tight smile that didn't reach his lips. "I trust I'm not intruding." "Only upon our peace of mind," she replied pleasantly. "Won't you sit down? We were just wondering whether to ring you." "That would have been unwise," Beecham said, settling himself in the armchair by the fire. "This matter you've entangled yourselves in, the Istanbul Pact, Faraz, all of it, you must leave it alone." Tommy shut the door. "That's rather direct." Beecham leaned forward, gloved hands clasped. Directness is sometimes the kindest form of warning. Tuppence placed the teapot before him with the grace of a hostess and the precision of a fencer. "Sugar?" "No, thank you." His tone made it sound like an accusation. "You've been prying into things best forgotten. The pact was a ghost of the old war, nothing more. Faraz resurrected it out of vanity, and look where that led him." "Dead?" said Tuppence softly. Beecham's gaze flickered. "Disappeared, likely dead, and if you continue, you may join him." Tommy met his eyes evenly. "That almost sounds like a threat, Sir Andrew." "A caution." He drew a folded handkerchief, dabbed his brow, then replaced it. "I owe you that much." Tuppence tilted her head. "Owe us? For what? Beecham hesitated, a fraction of a second too long, for not letting old mistakes ruin newer lives. There was silence, filled only by the gentle tick of the clock and the faint hiss of the fire. Finally he rose. "Promise me you'll leave this alone." Tommy said nothing. Beecham looked at Tuppence, perhaps knowing she would be the harder of the two. "Mrs. Beresford, you strike me as intelligent. Don't mistake curiosity for courage." "Oh, I don't," she said sweetly. "Curiosity is far more dangerous." He gave a weary sigh, picked up his hat and walked to the door. "You've been warned." When the latch clicked behind him, Tommy exhaled. "Well," he said, "that was charmingly sinister." Tuppence stood motionless, her expression thoughtful. Then she went to the window. "He's trembling." "What?" "His hands. Didn't you see? They shook when he lifted his cup. And there was blue ink on his cuff, the same shade as Faraz's cipher." Tommy frowned. "You're certain?" "I've spent half my life noticing stains on collars, dear. I'm certain." She moved to the desk and took out the photograph they'd found in the secret room. "He was there, Tommy, in Istanbul with Faraz, Nadir and the red-haired woman. He's been lying from the start." Tommy rubbed his temples. "All right. Suppose Beecham is involved. What does he gain by warning us?" "Time," she said promptly. "Time to clean up whatever mess is catching up to him." He looked around the flat suddenly. "Speaking of cleaning up, I don't remember leaving that drawer half open." The realization spread like cold water. Drawers were slightly misaligned, a cushion displaced, the faint smell of unfamiliar cologne lingering. They checked quickly, methodically. The papers on the bureau had been rifled through and replaced with too much care. In the study, the envelope, the original one Faraz had carried, was gone. Tommy swore softly. He didn't just visit us. He prepared for it. Tuppence touched the desk surface, noting the fine trail of dust disturbed by gloved fingers. "He must have searched it while we were at the door." "Efficient devil," Tommy muttered. "Desperate devil," she corrected, "which means we're closer to the truth than he can risk." She straightened, eyes bright. "We're not stopping now." They sat across from one another as twilight gathered over the rooftops. The city beyond the windows hummed faintly, a world of buses, bells, and unknowing peace. Tuppence spread a map of Europe on the table. Faraz's route, Istanbul to London by way of Paris, Calais, Dover. Somewhere along that line he realized he was being followed. If we retrace it, we might find what he left behind. Tommy regarded her wryly. "You do realize what you're suggesting sounds suspiciously like espionage tourism." "Call it a working holiday." He gave a short laugh. "Our honeymoon redux, only with spies instead of sunsets." "Quite right. We'll even pack lighter this time." He leaned forward, sobering. "Tuppence, this isn't like our earlier adventures. These aren't jewel thieves or forgers. These are professionals." "And so are we in our way." Her smile softened. "We've faced worse odds, though perhaps in better weather." Tommy sighed. "I don't know why I bother arguing with you. You've already planned the tickets." "Of course I have," she said, pulling 2 envelopes from the drawer. "I thought we might start at the British consulate in Istanbul. The records office may still hold Faraz's last telegram." He stared at her. "You're extraordinary." "I know," she said serenely. "Now help me find my passport before Beecham's friends decide to borrow it." As they packed, a shadow moved outside their window, barely visible against the glow of the street lamp. The figure lingered only a moment, then walked away. Inside, Tuppence held up a silk scarf. "Too frivolous?" "For espionage, yes. For you, never." "Flattery will get you an extra pair of socks," she said. Tommy laughed, but his eyes drifted back to the window, his instincts prickling. "Let's assume we're not alone anymore. From now on, no routines. We travel quietly." Tuppence nodded, closing her case. "Agreed. But do stop looking so grim, darling. It's terribly unromantic." He smiled faintly. "I was just thinking, every time we try to retire, the world insists on providing another corpse, another code, another conspiracy. That's the universe's way of keeping us interesting." They both fell silent, listening. Somewhere in the distance a car engine started, idled, and then faded into the night. Later, as they prepared for bed, Tuppence stood by the mirror brushing her hair. "Do you think he'll try again?" "Beecham?" "Yes. He's cornered, Tommy. Cornered men are unpredictable. Tommy watched the slow swing of the curtain in the faint breeze. He'll either run or strike first. Tuppence set down her brush. Then we'd best be the ones who move faster. He crossed to her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. You do realize this is madness. Of course, she said, smiling up at him. But it's our madness. The clock chimed 11. Outside, London went on pretending to sleep. And in the quiet, the Beresfords' flat, neat, respectable, utterly ordinary, had never felt less safe. The city rose before them like a mirage of memory, minarets pricking the sky, gulls wheeling over domes, the call to prayer folding itself into the hum of traffic and the whisper of the Bosphorus. Tuppence leaned out of the ferry window, the wind tugging at her scarf. Well, she murmured, Istanbul certainly knows how to make an entrance. Tommy, beside her, adjusted his hat and surveyed the skyline with a soldier's caution. It's not the entrances that worry me, he said dryly. It's the exits. She smiled. You used to say that about marriage. He gave her a sidelong glance. And yet, here we are, chasing ghosts and diplomats halfway across Europe. You can't say I don't keep things interesting. As the ferry docked, the crowd surged forward in a tide of languages and colours. Porters shouted, traders called from the quayside, and the scent of coffee, salt and tobacco wrapped around them like the city's signature. Tuppence breathed it in with a thrill. Smells like trouble. Probably is, said Tommy. Let's find our friend at the consulate before it finds us first. Inspector Kemal was not what either of them expected. He was round, cheerful, and had the eyes of a man who saw everything while pretending to see nothing. His English carried the faint sing-song rhythm of someone who'd learned it from Oxford dons and street vendors in equal measure. So, he said, pouring thick Turkish coffee into small porcelain cups, you are here for the Englishman who disappeared, Mr. Ferrars. Disappeared, murdered, or something between, said Tuppence. We're hoping you can tell us which. Kemal smiled. Ah, the English always want their mysteries tidy. Here, things are layered. Tommy sipped his coffee. It tasted like liquid iron filings, but did the job. You remember him, then? Oh, yes. He was a polite man. Always the same cafe, same table, same order. But one day he came to see me, said he feared he was being followed by another Englishman. Tuppence leaned forward. Did he give a name? No name, only this description. Kemal flipped open a notebook, scanned a line. Tall, fair, distinguished, wore gloves even in the heat, smelled faintly of lavender and ink. Tommy sat back. Beecham. Kemal nodded slowly. That is the name. Then your problem is bigger than I thought. He handed them a manila envelope. Inside were copies of Ferraz's belongings recovered from his lodgings, a torn telegram, a small notebook, and a ledger page in careful handwriting. Tuppence read the telegram aloud, voice low. Pact revived. Document found. Beecham not trusted. She met Tommy's eyes. So Ferraz knew Beecham was part of it, and didn't trust him. Kemal added, the ledger mentions payments to Vanguard Holdings, a company that does not exist here, but I traced it, London-based, registered to a post office box, and a dead man. Ferraz must have been tracking the money trail, Tommy said. Kemal's tone grew thoughtful. There was something else. The night before he vanished, Ferraz met someone near Galata Bridge. My informant swears it was the same fair Englishman. After that, no one saw him again. They stood on Galata Bridge at dusk, the water below shifting from sapphire to black. Fishermen lined the railings, their lines glowing faintly in the last light. The scent of grilled fish and diesel drifted in from the food stalls. Tuppence held the torn telegram carefully. He was here, she said softly. Ferraz met Beecham here, perhaps to exchange something, a document, proof. Or perhaps Beecham came to silence him, Tommy said. If Ferraz had evidence the pact was revived, Beecham couldn't afford to let him live. She looked across the river toward the lights of the old city. You think Beecham killed him? I think Beecham's been killing more than truth lately. They stood in silence, the sound of water slapping against the bridge's pillars. Then Tuppence caught sight of a familiar silhouette, a man leaning on the far railing, cigarette ember glowing briefly in the dark. Tommy, she whispered, third pillar on the right. He followed her gaze, saw the faint outline, tall, fair, coat-collar high. The man turned slightly, just enough for the flare of his lighter to reveal a clean-cut English profile. Beecham. But as Tommy moved, the man flicked his cigarette into the water and vanished into the crowd. They gave chase. The streets spilled away from the bridge like veins, narrow alleys twisting through spice shops and coffee houses. The air was alive with sound. Footsteps, the bark of vendors, a stray cat's yowl. Tommy caught sight of the grey coat ahead, turning left into a passage. He followed, Tuppence close behind. "Wait," she started, but he was already moving fast. They emerged into a small square lit by a single flickering lantern. Empty. Only a cart of oranges, overturned. Tommy turned, scanning. "He's gone." "No," said Tuppence. "He's watching." She pointed upward. A shadow shifted on the rooftop above. A tile cracked loose, falling between them. "Move!" They ducked into another alley, running blindly. Behind them came the soft echo of pursuit, not hurried, not panicked, a predator's pace. Tuppence's breath came quick. "Tommy, if this is Beecham, he's not alone." He didn't answer, only tightened his grip on her hand and pushed forward. They reached a flight of stone steps leading down toward the water. Halfway down, Tuppence slipped, the cobbles slick with rain from a burst pipe. She flailed, catching at the railing, but her foot missed. "Tommy!" He lunged, caught her wrist just as she pitched forward. The impact nearly dragged him with her, but he braced himself, hauling her back against him. For a moment they stayed there, heartbeats pounding in unison, the city roaring faintly above them. "Are you all right?" "Only mortified," she said breathlessly. "If I'd fallen, I'd have ruined the case, and my shoes." He managed a tight laugh. "I'd have missed the shoes more." They found refuge in a tea-house tucked into the hillside near the bridge, a place of brass lamps, patterned cushions, and silence thick as smoke. The proprietor, a solemn old man with a prayer bead bracelet, seemed not to notice their dishevelled state. Kamal arrived 10 minutes later, summoned by a hurried note Tommy had sent through a street runner. "You were followed," he said simply. Tommy nodded. "We saw Beecham, or someone made to look like him." Kamal frowned. "It would not surprise me. He is here in some capacity. Diplomats are difficult to question." He placed another envelope on the table. Faraz's notebook. I retrieved it from our archives. Inside, the entries were sparse but pointed. Nadir, financing through Vanguard. Beecham intermediary. New orders after treaty revival. Tuppence read aloud softly. "Beecham not trusted." She looked up. "He's the key to all of it. The money, the pact, Faraz's death." Kemal leaned back, studying them. "Then you must decide. What do you want? To expose him or to survive him?" Tuppence smiled faintly. "Ideally both." He sighed. "You remind me of my wife." Later, walking along the quiet waterfront, Tommy spoke first. "We're in deep now, Tuppence. Faraz was right. This isn't just an old secret. It's alive, feeding on what's left of the empire." She slipped her arm through his. "We've faced worse. Remember when we thought the worst thing in the world was running out of petrol outside Bournemouth?" He laughed softly. "Simpler times." They paused at the railing, watching ferries drift across the black ribbon of water, their lights trembling in the current. Tuppence said, "Do you think Beecham ever wanted to stop? Perhaps he's trapped by the very thing he created." Tommy shook his head. "No one ever falls into treachery by accident. He's still playing the game, only now he's running out of pieces." She turned to him, voice low. "And we're next on the board." He looked at her, her steady eyes, the faint defiance in her smile, and knew she was right. Above them, the muezzin's call rose once more, threading through the night. The Bosphorus shimmered under the moonlight, serene and deceptive, concealing its secrets in the dark water. And as the couple walked away from the bridge, arm in arm, shadows stretching long behind them, the unseen watcher lit a cigarette, its ember flaring briefly before the night swallowed it whole. The fire in Sir Andrew Beecham's study burned low, casting long shadows across the walls lined with leather-bound secrets. The faint scent of cigar smoke and varnish hung in the air, the smell of a man who lived too long among half-truths. Tuppence sat very straight in the armchair opposite him, gloved hands resting in her lap like a judge waiting for the verdict. Tommy stood by the mantel, outwardly casual, but his eyes were sharp as flint. Beecham regarded them both with weary detachment. "You've come back from Turkey, then?" "Indeed," said Tuppence. "We found the weather agreeable, the corpses less so." Beecham's lips twitched, though it might have been a grimace. "You're playing a dangerous game." "Oh, we're not playing at all," said Tommy evenly. "We've seen the ledger, the telegram, and the photograph. You, Faraz Nadir, and the lady with the red hair, all part of something called the Istanbul Pact. It's time you stop pretending you don't know what that means." Beecham's gaze dropped to the amber liquid in his glass. "You think you've uncovered some grand conspiracy. It wasn't that, not in the beginning." "Then tell us what it was," said Tuppence softly. He sighed, a sound half resigned, half relieved. "It began at the end of the war. We were tired, all of us. Diplomats, agents, double agents. The world was breaking into new sides faster than we could choose one. The Istanbul Pact was meant to be a safety net, a gentleman's agreement between men who had survived too much duplicity to die for their country's pride." He rose, pacing to the window. "We exchanged information, yes, but selectively. Secrets for secrets, protection for silence. It worked for a while. It saved lives." "And cost them," Tuppence said. His shoulders stiffened. "Eventually, yes. The network evolved. Greed always does. It became a system of blackmail. Intelligence sold to the highest bidder, or used to destroy rivals. When I saw what it had turned into, I tried to withdraw." Tommy's tone was cold. But Faraz didn't withdraw. He tried to expose it. Beecham turned back to them, his eyes haunted. Faraz was reckless. He found proof the pact still operated, not as espionage, but as organized blackmail. He was going to publish it through a journalist in Paris. I begged him to stop. "And when he refused," Tuppence asked quietly. Beecham looked at her for a long moment. "You think I killed him?" "I think you wanted to," she said, without malice. "But wanting and doing are two different things." He sank back into his chair, running a hand over his face. "I'm being framed, Mrs. Beresford. Someone wants you, and the police, to believe I'm the spider in this web. But I'm only one of the flies." Tommy's voice broke the silence. "Who benefits from all this, then? Who runs it now?" Beecham hesitated. "I can't tell you. Not because I don't know, but because if I speak, it won't matter whether I'm right or wrong. I'll be dead either way." Tuppence studied him, her intuition whispering that the fear in his voice was real. "You already are," she said gently. "Whoever's orchestrating this has decided you've outlived your usefulness." Beecham flinched, his hand tightening on the glass. "You don't understand. These people, they own silence they know how to erase." Tommy stepped forward. "Then help us stop them. We can protect you." Beecham gave a bitter laugh. "From ghosts? From shadows that sign their orders in invisible ink?" He shook his head. "No. Leave this to rot in peace. It's the only way anyone survives it." Tuppence leaned closer, her tone almost tender. "Sir Andrew, you can't bargain with ghosts. Sooner or later, they come to collect." For a heartbeat, she thought he might say more, but then he stood abruptly. "You should go. I have nothing else to tell you." Tommy frowned. "You have everything to tell us." "Perhaps, but not tonight." He moved to the door, polite but firm. "Please, I insist. Go home. Forget this business." Tommy met Tuppence's eyes. They both saw the futility of pressing further. They left in silence. As the butler closed the heavy door behind them, Tuppence said softly, "He's terrified." Tommy nodded. And cornered. Both tend to end the same way. It was just past midnight when the telephone rang. Tommy, half asleep, reached for it. "Beresford speaking." The voice on the other end was shaking. "Mr. Beresford, this is Larkin, Sir Andrew's man. You'd better come at once." "What's happened?" A pause. "Sir Andrew's dead." The line went dead. The Beecham residence was already crawling with police when they arrived, the sort of discreet efficiency reserved for influential corpses. Inspector Cray of Scotland Yard greeted them with a curt nod. "Found about an hour ago. Locked study, door bolted from the inside. Shot himself by the look of it." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "And the look of it is convincing." "Convincing enough for the coroner," said Cray. Pistol in hand, note on the desk. Classic remorse. Beecham didn't strike me as the remorseful type, said Tommy. They entered the study. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only grey embers. Beecham sat slumped in his armchair, head tilted unnaturally to one side, the revolver resting loosely in his hand. The smell of gunpowder still hung faintly in the air. Tuppence stepped closer, eyes sharp. "Something's wrong." Tommy followed her gaze. "Aside from the obvious," she pointed. "The ink bottle. It's sealed, but the note on the desk is written in fresh blue ink." He crouched beside the desk, examining the paper. "Forgive me, there was no other way." He touched the edge. Still damp. Someone brought their own pen or their own ink. Cray frowned. "You think it's staged?" Tuppence moved toward the balcony doors. The rug's smeared. "See here? Mud. And look, footprints. Too large for Beecham's shoes, and one's missing its heel tread." Cray followed her. The doors were locked from the inside. She knelt, testing the latch. "Locked, yes, but not from within. It's an old French mechanism. You can push it shut with a knife from outside. Easily done." Tommy looked back at the body. "So our diplomat didn't take his own life. Someone made sure he couldn't tell us the rest." Cray sighed heavily. "You realize, of course, this complicates things." "That's what we do best," Tuppence murmured. They examined the desk further. Beside the note lay Beecham's cigarette case, open but empty. Tommy frowned. "He never went without those. He was smoking when we left." Tuppence nodded. "And there's no ashtray nearby. Whoever killed him was careful, wiped prints, left the scene tidy, except for the theatrics." Cray pocketed his notebook. "I'll have the yard handle it. You two have done enough globe-trotting for one case." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Inspector, if I had a shilling for every time someone told me that, I could buy the yard." When Cray turned to issue orders, she whispered to Tommy, "The footprints. They'll match the pattern from the garden at the Chelsea house. The same men who spoke of Ferrar's failure. They've been watching him, waiting." Tommy's expression hardened. "And now they've silenced him." Outside, the dawn was beginning to stain the London sky, a cold grey that suited the mood. The street was quiet except for the murmur of engines and the distant clatter of a milk cart. Tuppence pulled her coat tighter. "He knew he wouldn't survive long after talking to us." Tommy nodded. He wanted to confess, maybe even redeem himself, but someone got to him first. They paused beneath the gaslight, the world feeling heavier than before. "What now?" she asked. He looked toward the house. "We still have the pieces. Nadir, the woman, Vanguard Holdings. Beecham may be gone, but the mastermind isn't finished. Whoever runs this has eliminated every witness except us." Tuppence's voice was quiet. "And we've just made ourselves the next witnesses." Tommy gave a grim smile. "Then we'd better stop behaving like amateurs." She slipped her arm through his, the gesture steadying. "We never do for long." He looked down at her, and for a fleeting moment, her eyes caught the pale light, fierce, unafraid. "Let's find whoever's still writing the script," she said, "before they write us out of it." They turned away from the house as the first light of morning touched the rooftops, glinting faintly on the wet pavements, a city waking to its routines, unaware that in one quiet study, a single gunshot had marked the next move in a game far older and far darker than anyone yet realized. The invitation arrived 2 days after Beecham's death, typed, unsigned, and slipped through their letterbox without postage. Tommy read it aloud at breakfast, toast forgotten halfway to his mouth. "Greybridge Hall requests your attendance at a private historical symposium. Topic: the changing nature of loyalty. Dress formal, masks provided." Tuppence arched an eyebrow. "Historical symposium? That's rather poetic for an espionage reunion." He turned the paper over. "No sender, no date, only this Saturday." "And the address?" He read it again. "Surrey, Greybridge Hall. I've heard the name somewhere." Tuppence's eyes glinted. "Beecham's diary." She hurried to fetch the battered notebook they'd taken from his study. "See here, last entry before he died. Greybridge, all players assembled. The Pact reborn." Tommy gave a low whistle. "So, the curtain rises on the final act." "Let's make sure we're in the front row," said Tuppence, folding the invitation neatly. "Under new names, of course. I've always fancied being someone called Mrs. Fairfax." "Then I shall be Major Fairfax, retired, slightly pompous." "You won't need to act," she said sweetly. The road to Greybridge wound through dense woodland before opening suddenly to reveal a vast Georgian house gleaming under the moonlight. Rows of parked cars lined the drive, black Daimlers, Bentleys, one conspicuously foreign limousine. Tuppence, in an elegant black gown and lace mask, leaned out of the window as their hired car approached the entrance. "It's like a ball thrown by ghosts," she murmured. Tommy, in dinner jacket and half mask, adjusted his cufflinks. "Let's hope the ghosts are hospitable." Inside, the hall glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. A string quartet played faintly, the music almost lost beneath the murmur of low, cultivated voices. Servants in black livery moved among the guests, offering champagne. Everyone wore masks, some ornate, some simple, and the air shimmered with the perfume of danger disguised as civility. A man with a clipped accent greeted them. "Major and Mrs. Fairfax, is it? Welcome to Greybridge." "Indeed," said Tommy easily. "We've been looking forward to tonight's symposium." The man smiled thinly. "You'll find loyalty is our most debated subject." Tuppence caught his meaning, and the faint bulge of a microphone wire running beneath his lapel. She murmured under her breath, "They're recording each other." "Spies talking about loyalty," Tommy whispered back. "That's a joke with teeth." Dinner was served in the grand hall, where portraits of long-dead generals seemed to watch the living with faint disdain. A long mahogany table stretched the length of the room, set with silverware that glinted like weaponry. At one end sat a man Tuppence recognized instantly despite the mask, Selim Nadir. His stillness gave him away, that diplomat's composure. At his side a chair sat empty. Opposite him, a handful of distinguished faces exchanged wary glances. The air felt brittle, like crystal under strain. Their host rose. "Friends," he said, voice smooth, "we gather tonight to discuss the legacy of our work, and to ensure our shared understanding of discretion remains intact." A ripple of unease crossed the table. Tuppence's hand brushed Tommy's under the tablecloth, their silent signal for stay alert. She scanned the table, the man from the Foreign Office whom she'd once glimpsed in Beecham's outer office, two women whose laughter felt rehearsed, and one figure near the far end, a tall woman in crimson silk, face half concealed by a silver mask. And then a scent, a soft, unmistakable perfume, jasmine with a note of tobacco. Tuppence's pulse quickened. "The red-haired woman," she breathed. Tommy glanced discreetly. "You're certain?" "I'd stake my lipstick on it." Conversation drifted around them, banal on the surface, razor-edged beneath. Guests spoke of mutual interests, containment, insurance files. Every phrase was a cipher. Tuppence leaned toward the crimson woman. "Charming evening," she said lightly. Charming. The woman's accent was faintly Eastern European, her tone mocking. "Only if one enjoys ghosts dining with their murderers." Tuppence smiled. "Oh, I collect murderers. So much more interesting than ghosts." The woman's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and amused. "Then you'll have a splendid evening." A bell chimed. The host rose again. Before dessert, a toast. To loyalty, to silence, to the pact that binds. Glasses lifted. To the pact. The phrase hung heavy in the air. Tommy met Tuppence's gaze. "No mistaking it now," he murmured. "This is the same organization, alive and thriving." "And recruiting by the look of it," she said. The clock struck 12. At that instant the chandeliers flickered, once, twice, then went out entirely. A murmur rippled through the room. Somewhere, glass shattered. A shot rang out, deafening in the darkness. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped, footsteps stumbled. Then, as abruptly as it began, light flooded back. Selim Nadir was slumped forward, one hand clutching his shoulder, blood spreading across his white dinner shirt. The crimson woman was gone. Tuppence was already on her feet, moving around the table. "Tommy, help me!" Together they lowered Nadir to the floor. His eyes fluttered open, dazed. She took it," he gasped. "What?" "The document. The pact." His voice broke. "She'll burn us all." He lost consciousness. Tommy looked up. The host barked orders. Servants rushed to bar the exits. Guests murmured in confusion, fear, denial. Tuppence's gaze darted to the far corner, where a wine crate stood half open beside a display of antique goblets. Something glinted within. Tommy, there. He followed her, prying the lid open. Inside, beneath straw padding, lay a packet of papers bound in red ribbon, stamped with the faded seal of the Foreign Office. The Istanbul Pact, Tommy whispered. Before they could react, a voice cut through the chaos. Calm, commanding. Step away from that crate. They turned. The red-haired woman stood in the doorway, gun levelled steadily at them. Without her mask, her face was striking, angular, beautiful, and burning with controlled fury. Hands up, please. You've been clever, but not clever enough. Tuppence straightened slowly. You're the one behind it all. The woman smiled faintly. Behind it? My dear, I am it. The pact was mine long before your government stole it. They used me, promised protection, then erased my name when peace made me inconvenient. Revenge, then, Tommy said. Justice, she corrected. I built a network of truth in an age of lies. The only difference now is that truth has a price. Tuppence's tone was cool. And blackmail pays better than patriotism. Patriotism is for fools and widows, the woman said sharply. But you could have stayed out of this. Tempting, Tuppence admitted, but we're terrible at staying out of anything interesting. The woman's eyes narrowed, then die interesting. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but in that split second Nadir stirred behind her, raising himself weakly and throwing the nearest wineglass. It struck her wrist, the gun firing harmlessly into the ceiling. Tommy lunged. The weapon clattered across the floor. The woman tried to run, but Tuppence caught her arm, twisting it behind her with surprising precision. I learned this from a sergeant major, she said cheerfully. He swore it worked on bears. By the time the police arrived, summoned quietly by Tommy through a hidden telephone in the study, the guests had shed their masks and their pretenses. The room looked less like a dinner party and more like the aftermath of a battle no one had truly won. Later, in a quiet antechamber, Inspector Cray appeared, his expression a blend of disbelief and weary admiration. So this is it, he said, lifting the recovered packet. The Istanbul Pact. Every file, every payment, every signature. Enough to topple 3 governments if it saw daylight. Tommy nodded. And enough to get a lot of good people killed if it did. Tuppence watched the red-haired woman being led away, her chin high despite her defeat. She believed she was owed justice, she said quietly. Cray shrugged. Revenge always thinks it's justice until someone bleeds. Tommy added, What happens to the files? They'll disappear, said Cray. Officially, they never existed. Same as you two. He gave them a pointed look. You didn't attend any symposium, and there was no gunshot at Greybridge Hall. Tuppence smiled. We're quite used to not existing, Inspector. It's rather restful. Dawn broke soft and pale over Surrey. The Beresfords stood on the steps of the hall, watching the last police car pull away. Tommy adjusted his tie. So ends the Istanbul Pact. What shall we call this one in the memoirs? The case of the masked symposium, perhaps, said Tuppence thoughtfully. Or the dinner that shot back. He laughed. Your titles always sound like something out of a cheap thriller. They sell better that way, he offered his arm. Breakfast at the first tea room we find. She took it, smiling. Only if it serves something stronger than coffee. They walked toward the waiting car as the sun climbed above the mist-shrouded fields, its light glancing off the grand windows of Greybridge Hall, a place that had hosted the ghosts of empires and now stood silent once more. And as the engine started, Tuppence looked back at the house one last time. Do you think it's over? Tommy paused. With us, darling, it never is. The car pulled away, leaving Greybridge and its shadows receding into the distance. Another chapter closed, another secret safely buried beneath the polite silence of post-war England. Later that week, a pale London morning slipped quietly into the Beresfords' Chelsea sitting room, touching the familiar clutter of maps, teacups, and yesterday's papers. Domesticity had dared to look in again. Tuppence regarded the stout brown teapot in the centre of the breakfast table as though it were a slightly disreputable guest. It's extraordinary, she said, buttering her toast, how the fate of several governments now depends upon our crockery. Tommy folded his newspaper. Safer here than in any official safe. No clerk in Whitehall has Fritz's respect for tea. And no official mind, Tuppence added, would ever suspect a document of hiding where the marmalade ought to be. He gave her a wry look. You're sure? Quite. We didn't steal it. We only declined to mislay it. Her eyes softened. If they lock it away again, someone will only dig it up for the next tidy little scandal. Here, at least, it has to get past my housekeeping. Tommy reached for his cup, studying her over the rim. Do you ever wish, he asked, that we'd stayed with parish meetings and quiet evenings? Frequently, said Tuppence, for almost 5 minutes at a time. He laughed. The sound sat well in the small, friendly room. Outside, a milk cart rattled by, and somewhere up the street a newsboy shouted about entirely different troubles. Tuppence rose, lifted the innocent-looking teapot, and set it with ceremonial care on the mantelpiece beside a pair of opera glasses and a very harmless seashell. There, she declared, let the shadows wonder where they went. We'll know. Tommy slipped an arm around her waist. Until the next knock on the door? Naturally, she said, but we finish breakfast first. The clock on the mantel ticked on, very proper and very calm, as if England had never heard of pacts or shadows or masks at midnight, and in the respectable little house in Chelsea, Tommy and Tuppence Beresford sat down to their cooling tea, quite ready, if necessary, to save the world again after toast.